So for tonight's class, we are going to talk about flipped curriculum, a little bit of digital divide discussion, because I know that you guys are still thinking about that, and academic language. So you're going to watch the video, The Flipped Classroom is Not. The link to this video is also available on Canvas.
As a flipped classroom teacher, I've seen lots of misconceptions around what the flipped classroom is and what the flipped classroom is not. So, rather than discussing what the flipped classroom is in my practice, I'll discuss a list that most flipped classroom teachers can agree the flipped classroom is not. So, let's get started. The flipped classroom is not the Khan Academy. While the Khan Academy is an excellent resource for use in and out of the classroom, the flipped classroom is special because classroom teachers create the videos to suit their students' needs. We want students to be active in their learning, not droids sitting in front of screens getting a lecture from someone halfway across the globe. The videos are an extension of the teacher and help create a strong relationship between student and teacher. The flipped classroom is not a replacement of teachers. This couldn't be further from the truth. In the flipped classroom, the role of the teacher is more important than ever. There's no sitting at the back of the class reading the newspaper and having a coffee, as much as I'd like to sometimes. In the flipped classroom, the teacher is active all day. Teachers get a chance to work with every student, every class. The flipped classroom is not all about the videos. Yeah, videos are the backbone of the flipped classroom, and I am hoping one of these days to produce a video that goes viral and perhaps appear on Ellen. However, it is the flexibility the videos provide that is the true benefit. Teachers now have additional classroom time where they can develop rich learning activities to extend their students' experience. The flipped classroom is not the silver bullet. The flipped classroom does not solve all that is broken in education. If it did, I'd probably be filthy rich. It's just one tool to increase student learning. Inflexibility, lack of classroom time, and student-centered classrooms are problems that I feel the flipped classroom helps solve. The flipped classroom is not a one-size-fits-all teaching approach. Each flipped classroom teacher develops an approach that works for them and their students. As an example, some teachers have students watch the videos in class, some students watch them at home, in a car, on a bus, on a plane. It's turning into a Dr. Seuss book. And some even get the students to create the videos themselves. The limits of the flipped classroom are only as limited as the teacher's imagination. The flipped classroom is not top-down. The flipped classroom is 100% driven by teachers. For the model to be authentic, it needs to be initiated and created by the teacher for the teacher. How often have we attended a staff meeting and be presented with the newest flavor of the week to never give it another thought? The flipped classroom is a flavor teachers want to do because they believe in it. And it's delicious. The flipped classroom is not a teacher holiday. The flipped classroom is anything but a holiday. The amount of time that goes into creating quality videos and activities is second to none. In the classroom, teachers are no longer spending their time lecturing. Instead, they're constantly interacting with their students, inspiring, observing, and as we all know, sometimes prodding. The flipped classroom is not easy. Students have been in the traditional model of school for their entire educational career. They like playing school. Some of them are very good at it. Now that we want them to play learning, it can be a tough pill for them to swallow. And lastly, the flipped classroom is not all about students watching videos for homework. It's about students using videos when and where appropriate for their learning journey. Many of my students find that they use their classroom time so effectively they rarely have homework. And believe me, they love this. Now they have time for things that truly matter to them, like Twitter and Facebook. These are just a couple of things I think the flipped classroom is, and the flipped classroom is not.
Click over to the Google form and respond to the questions. The link to this form is on Canvas, so you'll just go ahead and have to pause the video as you're watching it and click over to Canvas so you can access this form. You'll fill it out, just type in your name, and then answer those 3 questions. What are 2 things the speaker says about the flipped classroom? What's one thing you learned about flipped classrooms from watching this video? And one question that you still have about flipped classrooms. Then you'll read the article 10 Reasons to Flip, which is linked on Canvas. I'll go ahead and show you the article right now. Okay, it is about a southern Minnesota school district that flipped its math classrooms and the effects of that. Okay, and it's 5 pages in length, so it's not too bad. But it is a rural school district, so I think that's interesting for a lot of you guys, and you can kind of see, what happened with their experience. And there you go. So you'll read that article. Okay, and then after you're finished with that, you'll answer the questions. There may be questions, but actually, I have it posted as a group discussion, so you'll be doing more like a silent discussion, and you'll see other people's comments. So don't delete their comments, but go ahead and you'll click on that link and it'll take you to 10 reasons to flip discussion. Okay, and if you notice, it says you may choose to talk about one of the key points in the article. You can choose to ask a question you still have and want others to talk about, or you may respond to other people's responses. Treat it as a silent discussion, and make sure that you don't delete anybody else's comments. But you'll just click down to the bottom and say, I think blah blah blah, whatever you have to talk about. But remember, this is editable and everybody in our class can type into it. So don't delete people's comments, just add. Okay, if you see something that you want to add to, just click right there and then start typing, or you can even push return a couple times. Make sure you write your name since this is part of your participation in the LEXP this week. Make sure you sign your name after your comments. Okay, so you get credit for that. So there are lots of different ways to flip. As you've seen during class, we did a simulation, which is a good option. There are lots of simulations that could work for different content areas, and hopefully you have experimented with some of those. A lot of simulations, of course, take place in science, but I think there are simulations in history where it could simulate your experience through a historical event. There are simulations in English where you're filling in different things and it's helping you to experience writing in a different way. Lectures online and videos are the most common ways that people are flipping. So as far as just recording yourself or figuring out how to create a presentation online that students can access from home and pause and rewind. Discussion boards, I think that I'm trying to demonstrate the discussion boards in this case is that you can, create discussion boards that are on Google that could be a document that people could just continue to add to. You could do discussion boards like Canvas, which you guys have experienced during class. You could also do use Google as doing the Google quizzes. Now, actually, the Google forms that you guys have been filling out are in the Google quiz category, I guess, because you can choose to have multiple choice questions. I've just chosen that you fill in the blank and you're able to, add whatever text that you want to. But the Google quizzes are something that you would go into Google Forms and be able to create multiple choice. You could also create surveys in Google, and that's actually my favorite way to do the surveys because it has so many options and you don't have to subscribe to it. SurveyMonkey is another one that I have used a lot, but it limits the amount of questions that you can ask, and Google Quizzes does not do that. And then a web quest where students just kind of go through and learn from you kind of directing them on a website and telling them what to look for, and they maybe answer questions. So there could be a combination of those variety of things. So I'm trying to incorporate as many different things into this presentation as possible so you'll be able to get your brains thinking. So the digital divide, I know that many of you are still worried about the digital divide and how you can work to overcome this divide in your classroom and in your school. So take a look at the video that follows this slide. It's from about that school in Michigan that I mentioned during class that flipped the entire school. It's just a short video, but they talked about it on Dateline actually, and examined what the different things were. They talked to an English teacher, they talked to a math teacher, and people that were suspect, I guess, of this strategy, and also talked to a mom and to a kid. Now I know that it took place in Detroit. It's a low income school, but students don't have access to high levels of technology at home. Students don't have multiple computers. They're in the same sort of situations that your students are in at your schools, and they have come up with solutions, and it is still working. So I think it's a great video for you to watch just to get you thinking of how you can view this as something that can be overcome rather than something that is, impossible to overcome.
What if you took the traditional school day and flipped it its head. Not literally, of course, but having lessons offered at night at home and homework done by day in the classroom. That's the experiment underway at Clintondale High School, just outside Detroit, an area still reeling from the economic and social ills of the nearby city. The school serves many low-income families and faces tight budgets and declining enrollment.
So what's the number part that I'm going to throw for you?
Just 3 years ago, almost half of Clintondale's ninth graders were failing math, science, and English. And overall school performance was ranked in the lowest 5% in Michigan.
Yeah.
Principal Greg Green decided to take a risk.
Frankly, we weren't doing very well, and so we had to make a change. I mean, we were desperate for change.
His aha moment came while coaching his 11-year-old son's baseball team. Having learned to record and post instructional videos for his players to watch outside of practice, he was struck by how much time was then left to focus on individual players on the field. He saw the educational potential starting with the power of videos.
Kids can go back and watch them as many times as they want, and in me as an instructor or expert, I don't have to redo that all the time, and I can spend my time with the students in class and actually assisting them. And so if I could do that with 11-year-olds, imagine what we could do with 15 or 16-year-olds doing math.
Green went all in, flipping the entire school, urging his staff to rethink the use of technology and how it complements traditional teaching, and getting local businesses to help fund the
So
effort.
the legislative branch makes the laws.
Now, lectures are recorded and posted online,
The American Civil War lasted from 1861 to 1865.
or teachers can assign outside videos from the popular Khan Academy and TED Talks. Students watch these videos as homework outside of class.
Why do you say it's Smithsonian?
In class, students now do what was once considered homework, assignments designed to test learning comprehension. Clintondale teachers say this allows more time for one-on-one help and often encourages students to collaborate in problem solving. But English teacher Rob Damron said it took some convincing.
When we first did this, it was funny to look around that staff meeting and look at a lot of staff members, especially the ones that have been here 25, 30 years, and say, what are you talking about? What's a blog? What's a Google group?
Apostrophes makes a noun show ownership or possession.
For teaching for 20 years, I know what lessons kids are going to have a problem with. But I think with doing this flipped approach, there's problems I didn't even know existed. So you really can't hide back there in the corner and say, yeah, I got it. And then the teacher sees later on, well, no, you really didn't get it.
One problem the school faced head-on, students who can't afford or don't have access to technology outside of class. They're given extra time in the school's media lab.
Segregation before 1954.
Taking the technology-driven approach further, some lesson plans are now tailored to have students use the latest trends in social media.
Thanks to the 19th Amendment, us women have the right to vote.
We deserve to vote. We deserve to vote.
Like this project that required constitutional amendments to be summed up in 6 seconds for the popular website Vine. Green says that taken all together, after 3 years, the flip is paying off.
Our ACT gains have shown doubling the national average as far as ACT gains. State testing, we've had some mixed results on that. And we've also seen an increase in graduation rates to almost 90%, college acceptance rates at 80%.
Senior Darrell Wallace Jr. is one example. His grades have risen from a 2.5 GPA as a freshman to 3.5 as a senior. And he says the flip has played a big role. He now watches videos on his cell phone while taking the bus home into a rough section of Detroit, where he lives with his mother and 4 sisters.
I really looked at the videos more because I knew I might not have as much time at home because my sisters are in college and they need the computer, so I'm like, I can do it on my phone. And the bus ride is like 30 minutes, so I probably can get like half of my assignment done.
Darrell's mother, Sabrina Young, also likes the flipped model, saying there's only so much she can do to help with traditional homework.
Especially algebra. So him doing it at school is a plus for him and as well as me, because I just remember the majority of it.
The popularity of online learning has surged in recent years, and flipped classrooms have started popping up everywhere, from elementary schools to some of the nation's top universities. Clintondale is the first U.S. high school to do a total flip. Harvard's Justin Reich has been studying the trend and says he's cautiously optimistic.
What is exciting to me about the flipped classroom is that it gets teachers asking two really important fundamental questions. What are the best ways for me to use my time, especially the very precious time I have in classrooms with my students? And then what are the kinds of direct instruction that I could provide that could be digitized so that people could watch it again?
You'll notice that the last set of notes I gave you were for week 5.
But Reich says that flipping alone isn't enough. As with any lesson plan, it all depends on exactly what's being offered.
If what we see from the flipped classroom is that we take bad lectures and uninteresting worksheet problems that characterize a lot of the experience that students have in schools, and we simply flip the order of those two things, the odds that we see significant improvement in our schools is pretty low.
And so now we're going to be taking the derivative with respect to T.
Meanwhile, some individual teachers are experimenting with the flipped classroom on their own. 3 years ago, Stacy Roshan flipped her upper-level math classroom at the private Bullis High School outside of Washington, D.C., where students pay up to $35,000 a year in tuition.
What's the derivative of pi r squared h?
She says it's been working for her, but that it might not be for everyone.
I think what's the most important thing is that you really think through what your problem is. I wouldn't say that because everybody's doing the flipped classroom, it's cool, you should do the flipped classroom too. My problem was really time, anxiety, and perhaps if I went to another school, I would do things completely differently.
One added surprise for Roshan in structuring her class this way is what she learned about the reach of her online lessons.
I get thank you letters from students all the time, not even just from the U.S., but overseas too, and that part always amazes me.
Back at Clintondale, Principal Greg Green's big experiment is getting a lot of attention. More than 200 educators from around the world have visited the school, trying to draw lessons from the flipped classroom.
So now that you've watched that video from Clintondale, what can you learn from Clintondale that would work with your students? What still concerns you? Go to the Google form and submit your response. There's a link to this on Canvas as well. So you'll go in there, enter your name. What can you take away from Clintondale's experience, and what are you still concerned about? I think that the experience at Clintondale can resonate with all of the situations that you guys are facing in your classrooms. It is an urban school. Some of you are teaching in urban schools, some of you are not. However, I think that the digital divide that they talk about and the benefits that they're talking about in regard to flipping with their students is something that could be important for all of you in your classrooms. And the principal at Clintondale did not view it as a problem that could not be solved, and I think that is a big takeaway from this video for all of you that were feeling very overwhelmed with the idea of using a flipped classroom because of the digital divide that your students have, or you're worried that students don't have access. But I also think that in light of 21st century skills and how we want students to become more digitally literate, that we need to use digital tools in order to get them ready for their futures and to be prepared and to be on par with students that do have access. And so I think that it's a disservice to them if we're not doing those things. So once you're finished with that, please go back to the video, and then we're going to talk about academic language. So academic language, there's not really an official formal definition of academic language, but it refers to more than just vocabulary and grammar and reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And this is probably why so many of you have been concerned and confused in regard to using academic language in light of the EdTPA. So academic language is oral, written, auditory, and visual language. that is required to learn effectively in schools and academic programs. It's a language used in classroom lessons, books, tests, and assignments. It's a language students are expected to learn and achieve fluency in. It's often different from it's always actually, not often, it's always different from the language that they use to talk to their friends, to their families, to people outside of school. It's not the language that typically people talk in everyday speak. And so that is one of the things that's very different is that academic language is solely used when they're at school and solely used when they're talking in more formal contexts, which is not typically what they're, going to be speaking in everyday life. It's a meta language that helps learners acquire more than 50,000 words that they're expected to have internalized by the end of high school. It includes everything from illustration and chart literacy to speaking, grammar, and genres within fields. It's the verbal clothing we don in the classroom. I loved that quote, so that I just included that as the top. But think of academic language as the verbal clothing we don in classrooms. It's and in other formal contexts that demonstrate cognition within cultures and signal college readiness. There are two kinds of academic language. First is instructional language, so like what textual clues support your analysis, things that teachers would say, summarize, compare and contrast. So that's instructional language. Or it's the language of the discipline. So examples would be like alliteration in English, or axioms in math, or class struggle in social studies, or atoms in science, or treble clefs in music. Whatever the language of the discipline is. And no student comes to school adept in academic discourse. So thoughtful instruction is required. So terms to refer to academic language include academic English. Sometimes people will say that it's academic English, and they use that synonymously with academic language, given that academic language is the dominant language used in public schools. Academic literacy is sometimes also used interchangeably, but they do differ from place to place. So when academic language is taught and monitored in schools, which like in the EdTPA's case and in Washington state how it's important for teachers to do this, it's called academic language development, or ALD. And so when you're talking or thinking about academic language and teaching it specifically to students, that's what you're doing. You're developing their academic language. So for native English speakers, the development of academic language builds progressively on conversation skills, because native English speakers come into school already having the basics and they already speak English, but they're speaking it conversationally, and so they don't have these vocabulary words that prepare them to read in textbooks and to conversate with people in more formal contexts. The challenge for English language learners, if you have any ELLs in your classrooms, is that they are learning both at the same time. They're being taught an academic language, but they don't even know conversational language. So they're trying to learn both of those at the same time, and it's even more difficult. The acquisition of academic language can also conflict with cultural identities. For example, students of color, ethnic minorities, or English language learners may feel they're being forced to learn a style of language they associate with a cultural group they may feel excluded from, because academic English, or the English used in schools, is associated with white middle class America or with highly educated groups. And so when they come into school and they're speaking something like, Spanglish, or they're speaking African American language, that is sometimes at odds, because we expect them to speak in this formal academic English at school, which is not something that is valued within their cultural groups. So sometimes there's tensions between, racial, ethnic, or socioeconomic backgrounds that can cause these feelings, and students feel like their families, and the school are kind of in conflict. So correcting urban slang in a writing assignment. maybe felt like a personal criticism by the student rather than something that they view as we're trying to help them with their academic English and to help them to become more successful in school. It is really a hard part to navigate because you have to figure out what the students are bringing with them to school and how to acknowledge that and how to be culturally responsive and give them, respect for what their home culture is without making them feel bad. But they do have to learn academic English in order to be successful in the context of school and in the context of probably in business and in their future jobs. And so it's an interesting dichotomy and almost like a binary at times where students are speaking a whole different form of English at home and a whole different form of language at home versus what they speak at school. And it's not an easy thing to navigate, but that's something that you do need to realize is that most students, they speak English, of course, but they're not bringing that kind of English that you expect them to use in school. They're speaking a different kind of English. So who needs ALD, academic language development? Everybody. Everybody needs it. Particularly, though, students with cognitive or developmental delays, so our IEPs, our students with 504s, students who live in unsupportive, dysfunctional, or unstable environments because they may not have books at home, they may not have parents that are educated, parents that have gone to college, children from high poverty, low education, or otherwise disadvantaged backgrounds who enter school without those basic language and literacy skills. It goes along with the same, with my literacy background, the students that enter school that have not had reading or not have had books at home, they come into school even in kindergarten with millions of words deficient compared to students that have had books at home and have parents reading to them. And it continues, and by the time that they get into middle school and high school, they are millions and millions and millions of words behind those other students. So there are a number of factors that influence the acquisition of academic language, including language modeling that students receive at home. So just like I said, it's how their parents talk, it's how they hear other people talking at home. If their parents correct their language errors or explain the meanings of words at home versus if they don't, if they use a diverse vocabulary at home versus parents who don't, if there are books in the home, if they encourage their children to read, or do they even talk about those books at home. So there's lots of different things that can count as language modeling. It may even be the types of TV programs that they watch and how the parents talk about that. Intentional English language modeling is more common in wealthier, higher educated English speaking households, and it's often not present in disadvantaged or non English speaking home environments. So, conversational versus formal language, there are lots of differences. The differences include grammar, vocabulary, punctuation, syntax. Syntax is like how the words are put together, how the sentences, if they're very complex sentences versus very simple sentences. They're discipline specific terminology, like I mentioned, the axioms or, alliteration in English, and then rhetorical conventions of how you actually use the language to convince people or to portray emotions. And remember, rhetoric includes those logos, ethos, and pathos. And people use those in their day-to-day talking without even realizing it. But in academic English, it's used differently. And it's not going to have as much emotions. It's going to be more logical. It's going to have more ethos because we're citing sources and we're making sure that what we are talking about refers to things that are valid. But in conversational English, you're using more more pathos, because you're trying to evoke more emotions. Most of the time, there's a lot more storytelling in conversational language. And so it's a whole different format comparatively. So there are lots of differences. Okay, so competency in academic language bleeds into a wide variety of related non-linguistic skills that are difficult and impossible to separate from language ability. So foundational academic skills such as organizing, planning, or researching, cognitive skills such as critical thinking, problem solving, interpreting, analyzing, memorizing, recalling. So all of these things that are part of academic success in school, but may not necessarily be related to them writing or reading. So those are important. The learning modes, how they question, how they discuss, what they even notice when they're in class, or what they are observing, how they theorize about things that are happening or experiment. Work habits, so once again, persistence, self-discipline, curiosity, conscientiousness, responsibility. And then what about these other forms of literacy, such as technological literacy, online literacy, media literacy, multicultural literacy, lots of other literacies that I didn't include either. And so academic language can affect all of these other things when students are lacking in that, because it's going to help them to understand some of these more complex things. So due to the linguistic irregularities, slang, idioms, those different things, learning academic English can be challenging, in particular for non-native speakers. So they don't understand, like, why do we say embarrassment instead of embarrassness or embarrasshood? Why do we say shyness instead of shyment or shyhood? And it doesn't really stick, because we can't just use all of the grammar rules and apply them to all of them, because we have so many irregular words in English. But not just grammatical rules, academic English also requires like just different things that we have to know, such as the metric system, or different mathematical terms or signs, or knowing the context, and knowing that a product in math means something different than a product in business. Or what does inflation in economics means compared to inflating a bicycle tire? Or what about a bug in software coding versus a bug that's on your floor? So, and there's lots of different things like that that we really have to think about. So, one of the first things that you could do is you're figuring out what words to identify as academic English in your lesson plans, is to start with those tier 2 words. And what they describe as tier 2 words are the words that you use in your instruction. So this was the first types of academic English that I was talking about a couple slides ago, is that they're not the lesson's primary learning objective, but they're critical that students understand what they mean in order to process what's happening in the classroom. So they appear in Common Core standards, they're on standardized tests, and they appear in our classroom all the time. They're words such as paraphrase, summarize, predict, justify. I brought these up, I think, during class, and I have mentioned these, but when you say explain or describe or comprehend, those are all tier 2 words that are academic English. Students have to know what you mean when you mean explain or examine or synthesize. They don't know what those mean. And to be honest, a lot of teachers don't know what they mean specifically, because they'll talk about that we're going to discuss, but then the teacher's discussing the whole time, and that's not really what discussion is. So we do have to think about how we use these specific words in instruction, and not use them synonymously at times when they're not synonyms. There are 8 other strategies that you could use to help improve academic literacy, and that you could identify in your EdTPA lesson plans. Encourage students to read diverse text. Introduce summary frames. Help students translate from academic to social language and back again. Complete scripts of academic routines if they're doing presentations. I'm going to go into more depth on these. Dynamically introduce academic vocabulary. Help them diagram similarities and differences. Write with a transition handout and maybe teach key words so they can understand objectives and test prompts. So reading diverse texts, think about, the differences in genres and how students could learn if they were reading from a textbook or an academic text or a primary source, and how those readings could differ, but also those types of things that they would need to know in order to navigate those different varieties of text. They're also going to encounter different vocabulary based on the types of text that they're reading, and I think that sometimes encountering words that are perhaps synonyms or perhaps easier versions of the words, maybe in a picture book or a fiction book, and then encountering it in the textbook or in the academic text, they may already have that, they'll be able to get the context clue and figure out what they mean. Introduce summary frames. I think helping them to learn how to summarize could also help get them familiar. So if the main point of the paragraph is problem solution, you could give them this blank, and they would just fill it in. So and so wanted blank, but this happened, so this other thing happened. So it was problem and solution, or what decision they decided. Cause and effect. Such and such happens because of this other thing that happened. Academic to social language, you could model how to say something in a more academic way or paraphrase it into a more conversational way so they could go back and forth. Provide students with difficult text and have the teams reinterpret it into everyday language, even text speak or other Englishes. I keep thinking about how students use emoticons. They use all of these different ways of communicating now that are not academic, but it's their everyday language. You could also give them scripts for academic routines, maybe, helping them figure out how to start their presentations. The topic of my presentation is blah, blah, blah. And so they have that to begin with. And if they want to vary once they get familiar with it, but I think it gives them those discourse words and to figure out how to navigate the academic landscape. In the first part, I'll give a few basic definitions. In the next section, I'll explain blank, blank, blank. In part 3, I'm going to show, whatever. And so to help them to understand how they would present this information and model it for them. Introducing academic vocabulary dynamically, encountering the vocabulary in authentic context can help them to really internalize the definitions. They hear you using it, or you use it in a funny way, or you tell a personal story and use that word somewhere within the story. You show a picture of what the word means, read it within the story that they will read. Show a video that has the word being used. Find it being used in real ways. Any of those things that can provide that authentic context where they see that this isn't just some word that they randomly use in English class or in social studies class, but that they'll use in their real lives. Similarities and differences. We've talked about graphic organizers, and you've probably talked about them in every single education class that you've had, but completing Venn diagrams, T-charts, other graphic organizers to show relationships of concepts such as similarities and differences, or cause and effect, or anything like that. And this is one of Marzano's high yield instructional strategies. So anytime that you use graphic organizers to help students understand and to process what they're learning, it can really help them. And that is an academic vocabulary concept. Teaching key words, helping them to learn what it means to analyze, what it means to describe. And I had talked about this already, but students and teachers often use words interchangeably, but you need to define them for yourself. What do you mean when you say examine? What do you mean? And what do you think that those words actually look like in performance from your teacher or from your students, so that you can explain to your students what you mean when you say these words, and it will help them. Now you need to read the text academic language function. After reading that text, click over to the Google form. So let me show you the text. It's Academic Language Function Toolkit. And you'll click through there and then go ahead and read what it says about academic language. So there's a little bit more information about developing academic language in your core content, building functional language. There's some pedagogy suggestions or strategies that can help you. How some of those are the high yield strategies mentioned by Marzano, and there are things that you guys will be able to use in your future classrooms with some great suggestions. I think this will also help you as you're going through and developing your ed TPAs. So go ahead and look through. I know there's a lot of pages, but there's a lot of diagrams, so it won't take you too long to read through and check everything out and maybe get a better idea of what academic language could be and is. So go ahead and do that. Once you're finished with that, click over to the Google form, and this will just be kind of an assessment of all of your learning about academic language. So type your name, what does academic language mean? Answer that question in your own words, and then you're going to choose which of the methods suggested is the most likely. So I just want you to choose one of these. Which one do you think is the most likely to influence your teaching? Which one do you think that you would use the most? And then answer that question. Does academic language influence other school competencies? And then what did you learn? How can this help you with your ed TPA? And go ahead and select submit once you're finished with that. Okay. Then I just want to say thank you for following along with this. We'll talk next week about your experience with this flipped lesson, but keep in mind that you would only do part of this lesson for homework with middle school or high school students. This is more like an online lesson, and you want to keep your videos short. So you just do part of one of those videos, 5 to 10 minutes, maybe with a little instructional video attached, so students can complete it quickly. You don't want to have them sitting on the computer for an hour like I had you sitting on the computer for an hour, but since we didn't have class, kind of makes up for that time that we didn't have together. Now, if you are in my Monday night class, this is what is due next time that I see you. Using reflective practice to incorporate formative assessment in a middle school science classroom by Troutner and Buck. The permalink is on Canvas, and then you're going to read Chapter 6 from Teaching and Assessing 21st Century Skills, and then lesson plan number 7, which is your teacher's choice lesson, and questions about your guest speaker that's coming is an ed TPA and student teacher guest speaker. So you actually have to submit questions, and that is also a link on Canvas as a Google form so that I can submit that to the guest speaker. You need to have that submitted by Friday at 5 because I want to get that to those. You actually have 2 coming in. Get them to the speakers ahead of time so that they can prepare those questions ahead of time. Okay, if you are in the Monday day class, this is what you have due. So you are also reading Chapter 6, Controlling Oneself, from your Teaching and Assessing 21st Century Skills textbook. You are also reading Using Reflective Practice to Incorporate Formative Assessment by Troutner and Buck. You're doing lesson plan number 7, but for you, that lesson plan is your flipped classroom or technology lesson plan, and you also have your questions for your ed TPA guest speaker. They're due by Friday, and the link to the Google form is on Canvas, so just make sure you go on there and submit those so that the speaker can have questions ahead of time.